Sunday School teacher, I'm glad that you've joined us for our time of study and preparation. I'm Tim Smith with Sunday School University, and we are working on the lesson for Sunday, August the 11th. The title of this lesson is Healing. We're going to be in Acts chapter 9, the end of the chapter. The point of the lesson is this: God invites His followers to be instruments of His power. This session, these verses, highlight Peter's ministry outside of Jerusalem. Peter had been in Samaria. He had been there in response to the concerns raised during Philip's ministry there. When he was there in Samaria, he had his first glimpse of the greatness of God's grace with non-Jews. Now, traveling through Lydia to the coastal town of Joppa and eventually up the coast to Caesarea Maritima, Peter learned even more about the grace of God. As an instrument of God's power, Peter saw Gentile people healed and saved. And he also saw some Jewish Christians who would have never expected to be touched by God. So let's look at these. Acts chapter 9, verse 32 through 35. As Peter was traveling from place to place, he also came down to the saints who lived in Lydia. And there he found a man named Aeneas. Aeneas was paralyzed, and had been bedridden for 8 years. Peter said to him, "Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up, make your bed." And immediately he got up. So all who lived in Lydia and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. So here in verse 32, Peter continued his traveling and preaching, and he was doing what a missionary does. He was traveling from place to place, meeting with those who were Christians. These had been reached. These also may have been people who were in Jerusalem, but because of the persecution in Jerusalem, fled, and now they lived in these different areas. When it says there in verse 32, he traveled from place to place, the words that are used there basically mean that he traveled through the entire country, or that he had an extensive travel. There in verse 32 talks about Lydia. Lydia was located on the road going from Jerusalem to the coastal city of Joppa. Lydia was about 30 miles northwest of Jerusalem. The town of Lydia was known for its trade of purple dye, and also was known for its location of rabbinic learning. In other words, seminary would be there. Verse 33, in Lydia, Peter encountered a man named Aeneas. The only details that Luke provides to us about this man was that he was paralyzed and that he had been bedridden for 8 years. The word paralyzed that is used there is weak or bedridden or disabled. So we know that he had been in this condition for 8 years. Again, we know that this man was suffering from a genuine, serious, long-term condition, and that's Luke's point here. Verse 34, Peter was careful to communicate that it was Jesus Christ who had the power to heal the man. That's in verse 34. When he says, Jesus Christ heals you. Doesn't say, I'm doing it in the power or in the name of. He just says, this is Jesus doing this. And Peter says, get up and make your bed. So we hear that and we think, okay, here's somebody who's laying out and they're on a mat. Well, the term make your bed that is used there is to make your bed, in the words that are used, to spread out as preparing an area to be occupied for a meal. And so he's not saying get up and pick up your bed and leave. He's saying go and get ready to join everybody in the meal. So immediately he gets up, and the immediacy of this, whenever you see that in a healing, when it says and immediately he got up, that's demonstrating God's power working through the apostle. In verse 35, people saw the power of God at work. It talks about Sharon, the plain of Sharon. This was a region. It's a coastal plain, about 11 miles in width. And so it is a large area comparative to the nation of Israel. It runs along the Mediterranean coast from near modern Tel Aviv in the south to the foothills of Mount Carmel to the north. It's about 45 miles. Again, that's a large area there in the nation of Israel, the plain of Sharon. The point that Luke is making here is that the healing of this man Aeneas made an incredible impact on the residents. Verse 36, in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. She was always doing good works and acts of charity. About that time, she became sick and died. After washing her, they placed her in a room upstairs. Since Lydia was near Joppa, the disciples heard that Peter was there and sent 2 men to urge him, don't delay in coming to us. Verse 36. News of Peter being in Lydia had reached Joppa. Again, remember that this news spread through the plain of Sharon. Again, Joppa is located on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. It's about 35 miles northwest of Jerusalem. In ancient times, Joppa was the only natural harbor for Israel. So it was the main harbor town until Rome built another harbor in Caesarea Maritima. We're introduced to Tabitha, Dorcas, as a person who was always giving and taking care of others. So while Peter was preaching in Lydia, Tabitha had suddenly got sick and died. Now, there were no family members mentioned. There's no husband, there's no kids, there's nobody mentioned that's going to take care of her but the church people, the Christians, the brothers, sisters of the faith. She is a widow who has no children. Now, washing her body, was customary. Yep, that's what you do. But placing her in the upper room expressed both the church's grief and their hesitancy of letting her go. I mean, again, the practice was, oh, they died, let's get them buried. And they did that, and still to this day they do that rapidly. Their Jews do that. In verse 38, the disciples at Joppa had heard Peter was in Lydia, and they likely heard about the healing of Aeneas, and so they sent 2 men to him. Now, I hear this story, and I think about the similar appeal that Mary and Martha made to Jesus when Lazarus was seriously ill. This journey from Lydia to Joppa would have been a probably 2 to 4 hour journey. So look at verses 39 through 43. Peter got up and went with them. When he arrived, they led him to the room upstairs. All the widows approached him, weeping and showing him the robes and clothes that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. He knelt down, prayed, and turning toward the body, he said, "Tabitha, get up." She opened her eyes, saw Peter, and sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her stand up. He called the saints and the widows and presented her alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed the Lord. Peter stayed with them some time in Joppa with Simon, the leather tanner. All right, so verse 39, Peter responded positively to the summons from the disciples in Joppa. There's no doubt that as he came in, there were those that were showing grief, and their grief was real. These were not mourners who were brought in and paid money to grieve and to weep and to wail to draw attention. These were real people who were experiencing loss and grief over the death of Dorcas or Tabitha. And they're showing Peter stuff that she had done. The robes and the word robe there is describing the internal garment typically worn next to the skin. Clothes, that's the clothing in general. That's the outer garments like a cloak. This lady had made them stuff, and it was special to them. In verse 40, Peter sent them out of the room, much like Jesus had sent out the all when they went and raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. Peter used the same words that Jesus used when he said, "Get up." And the end result was not the magic words, but the faith in what God did. She opened her eyes and sat up. Verse 41 through 42, Peter's actions emphasized that God had performed an amazing act of mercy. Again, no mention of family. And because no family is mentioned, it seems very clear that the church, the Christian family, had become her family. No reaction is recorded. Okay, they were grieving, they were in mourning, but there's no reaction recorded. But based on their prior condition, there was probably much loud rejoicing going on. Tabitha's resurrection from the dead must have been a compelling testimony to the power of God and to the truth of the gospel. In verse 43, Peter stayed in Joppa. This was not his plan. He was sensitive to the working of the Spirit, and he remained to join the work that God was doing in that community. And again, that last statement, who he stayed with, is significant because he stayed in the home of a tanner. Again, this statement, this small statement, indicates that he was beginning to distance himself from the traditional Jewish rules that were standing in the way of evangelizing Gentiles. So as you teach this lesson, I've got you some points there, some summary. Believers can address needs in the name of Jesus. Believers should demonstrate godly character. And number 3, believers should prayerfully consider how to honor Christ in all situations. What are we going to do as we teach this lesson? Create interest, the very beginning. Again, the body of the lesson. Spend 75% of your time going through the Scriptures. And then the closing, the application. I'm giving you some ideas about the creating interest, but also the closing. How can you minister to people's needs in a way that honors Christ? What is it that we need to be doing to meet people's needs? How has the experience of God's working through other believers to meet your needs motivated you to bless others? Get your group talking about how they were ministered to and that motivated them to meet the needs of others. Well, the title of this lesson is Healing. The point is God invites His followers to be His instruments of His power. God invites His followers to be instruments of His power. Well, I'll be praying for you as you teach this coming Sunday. God bless you.